Alina walked slowly through the gates of her new college. Her long brown hair was tied back, and she kept her eyes on the ground. Soft wind brushed past her face, but she didn't lift her head. The sound of students laughing, calling each other, and running around filled the air. But she stayed quiet, holding her books close to her chest like a shield. It was her first day at this new college. She had moved to this small town only a few days ago with her mother. Her father had passed away last year, and everything had changed since then. Her mother wanted a fresh start, away from the noise of the city and the painful memories. Here, they were in a quiet town where no one knew them. Alina had always been a quiet girl. She didn't talk much in school, never liked being in the spotlight. She kept her feelings locked inside, just like she kept her piano skills hidden from the world. She had been playing piano since she was 6. Her father had been the one to teach her at first. Later, a family friend who was a famous pianist had trained her. But after her father died, she couldn't touch the piano for months. It felt like the music was gone from her life. Now at this new college, she had no friends. No one who knew her past, and no one who knew what she could do. All she wanted was to blend in, do her classes quietly, and go home. But life had different plans. In the first week of college, Alina noticed something. Every student had to take at least one performing arts class. It was a rule at the school. There were options like theater, dance, or music. She didn't want any of them, but she didn't have a choice. She was placed in the music class because it had empty seats. Her heart sank when she saw the piano in the corner of the music room. It was old but still beautiful. It reminded her of the one in her childhood home. She couldn't look at it for too long. It brought back memories that made her chest hurt. The music teacher was a woman in her late 50s. Her name was Mrs. Kelsey. She had sharp eyes and a voice that didn't accept nonsense. She looked over the students with a mix of boredom and strictness. Alina sat at the back, hoping to go unnoticed. She kept her headphones on during breaks and avoided group discussions. She listened carefully in class, but never raised her hand. Mrs. Kelsey noticed her silence. In her eyes, Alina was either lazy or uninterested, and teachers like her didn't like that. In the second week, she began calling on Alina more often, asking her to read music sheets aloud or identify instruments. Alina did everything correctly, but still quietly. One day, Mrs. Kelsey stood in front of the class and said they would each perform a piece on the piano in 2 weeks. It was part of their grade. Some students groaned, some looked nervous, and some were excited. Alina sat frozen in her seat. When the teacher began handing out music sheets, she stopped at Alina's desk. She gave her a small smile, but it wasn't a kind one. It was more like a challenge. "You'll play this one," she said. Alina looked down at the paper, her eyes widened slightly. It was a piece by Liszt, fast, complex, emotional. It was one of the hardest beginner-level classical pieces anyone could be given. Mrs. Kelsey walked away before Alina could say anything. The students around her looked at the sheet too and chuckled. "She's going to crash so badly," one whispered. "Why would Mrs. Kelsey give her that?" another asked. "I guess she's testing her limits," someone else replied. Alina didn't react. She folded the paper and put it in her bag. Her hands trembled a little, but her face stayed calm. In the next few days, things didn't get better. During lunch breaks, some students started watching her from across the cafeteria. Some even joked about her performance day. One girl said aloud, "It's going to be a train wreck. I'll bring popcorn." No one really knew Alina. No one tried to. They only saw a quiet girl who didn't talk, who didn't smile, who kept her eyes low and her music to herself. And in a place where performance mattered, silence was often seen as weakness. But what no one knew was that Alina used to practice piano for 4 hours every day. She had performed in small concerts when she was a child. Her fingers knew music like birds knew the wind. She could feel every note like it lived inside her. But that part of her had been locked away. After her father died, she had stopped playing. The piano at home stayed covered in a thick white cloth. Dust gathered on the keys, just like silence gathered in her heart. Now this challenge stirred something inside her. First she wanted to run from it. She thought of skipping the performance, telling the teacher she was sick, or even dropping the class. But every time she sat quietly and looked at the sheet music, something deep inside her moved. One evening, she went home, opened her bag, and took out the music sheet. She placed it on the small table near her bed. Her mother walked into the room and saw it. "You're going to play again?" her mother asked gently. Alina didn't answer right away. Then she nodded once. Her mother didn't say more. She just walked to the old shelf, opened a box, and handed Alina a small key. "I never threw it away," she whispered. "It was the key." To the piano room in their house, Alina stood in front of the door for a long time. Her heart beat faster than usual. She slowly unlocked it, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The room smelled like dust and memories. Sunlight came in through the half-open window. The piano sat there, just as she remembered. She pulled the cloth off and touched the keys. They were cold at first, but they felt like home. She sat down slowly, placed her fingers gently, and closed her eyes. The first note was shaky. The second was better. By the 10th note, her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The music flowed like a river that had been blocked for too long, spilled from her hands, her memories, and her heart. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't stop playing. That night, she stayed in the room for hours. Her mother didn't interrupt. She just listened from the kitchen, her heart full. The next morning, Lena walked into the music class and sat in her usual seat. Some students still laughed when they saw her. One even made a loud fake piano sound when she entered. Mrs. Kelsey said nothing. She continued her lesson like always, but something had changed. Alina wasn't nervous anymore. She wasn't afraid of what people thought. She had touched the piano again, and now the music inside her was awake. She started practicing every evening, slowly at first, then faster. Her hands became confident, her posture stronger. She watched videos of famous pianists, took notes, and listened to recordings. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't need to. As the performance day came closer, her classmates still believed she was going to fail. Some even started a bet on how many notes she would miss. Teachers didn't expect much from her either. Mrs. Kelsey still looked at her with that mix of suspicion and amusement, but none of that mattered to Alina now. For the first time in a long time, she didn't care about what others saw. She cared about what she felt. She wasn't doing this to prove anything to anyone. She was doing it for herself, and that was enough. Alina sat in the music room, watching the others practice. The class was filled with different sounds, some soft and sweet, some loud and messy. Students were trying their best to get the right notes, but most of them were only average players. Even the ones who thought they were good often made mistakes. Still, they played with confidence, laughed when they got things wrong, and tried again. But Alina stayed silent, sitting in the back with her headphones on, pretending to listen to music, but actually just thinking. She had started practicing again at home every evening. At first, her fingers felt stiff. It was hard to remember everything after staying away from the piano for so long. But every night, her hands grew stronger, her mind clearer. It was like opening a door she had closed long ago, and light was slowly coming in. But no one at college knew about her secret. No one knew that every evening, while they were joking or watching movies, Alina was sitting at her piano, playing that same difficult piece again and again until every note felt like part of her soul. Still, at college, people talked about her. They didn't stop. She heard the whispers in the hallway. She noticed the looks, the smirks. One afternoon, she passed by a group of girls from her class. They were looking at a phone and laughing. "Poor thing," one of them said loudly. "She's going to embarrass herself so badly." Another replied, "She can't even talk properly in class. How's she going to play that piece?" "I think the teacher wants to prove a point," someone else added. "Like, see what happens when you stay quiet and don't participate." Alina kept walking, pretending she didn't hear anything, but deep down, the words stuck to her. They didn't hurt as much as before, but they still stung a little, even in the classroom. The attitude toward her was cold. Mrs. Kelsey had given up trying to talk to her. Other students barely included her in music group work. Sometimes when students shared their practice progress, they skipped over her, assuming she had nothing to show. No one asked her if she was ready. They all just assumed she wasn't. Some students even joked in front of her, like she couldn't understand. One boy named Derek said, "She probably thinks Chopin is a food item." The others laughed loudly. Alina looked at him calmly, then returned to her notebook. Derek didn't know that Alina could play Chopin pieces with her eyes closed. One afternoon, while she was walking to the music room, she passed by the staff office. The door was slightly open and she heard two teachers talking. "She's a strange girl," one voice said. "She never speaks, doesn't show any interest." "She doesn't even try," the other replied. "Mrs. Kelsey gave her that piece on purpose. She's going to fail, and maybe then she'll realize music isn't for everyone." Alina froze for a moment. She could feel her heart beating faster. She knew she shouldn't have listened, but now she had. And those words weren't just coming from students, they were coming from the teachers. Even they didn't believe in her. That night at home, she didn't go straight to the piano. She sat in her room quietly for a long time. Her mother knocked on the door gently. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Alina nodded, even though her eyes were full of tears. Her mother sat beside her and held her hand. "You know, I used to worry about you," she said. "After your father passed away, you closed up. I didn't know how to help. Now watching you play again, even from the kitchen, I feel like you're healing. Slowly, and I'm proud of you, no matter what happens." Alina squeezed her mother's hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The next moment, she stood up, wiped her tears, and walked to the piano room. She practiced for hours that night. She didn't stop until her hands were tired, and her back ached. She didn't want to play the piece just to prove others wrong. But something inside her knew this performance was important, not just for her reputation, but for her heart. Meanwhile, the talk at school continued. One girl said, "I bet she won't even show up." A boy replied, "No, she come. She'll mess up in the first 10 seconds and walk off." Some even made fake bets. One student wrote on the whiteboard, "Alina's crash countdown, 5 days to go." Mrs. Kelsey didn't erase it. She just looked at it and said nothing. But something strange happened in the last few days. A few students noticed Alina's calmness. She didn't look scared. She didn't beg for a simpler piece. She just came to class, listened, took notes, and left. Some students started to feel confused. Is she acting like this because she doesn't care, one asked? Or is she actually ready? "I think she's in denial," another said. "She'll break down on stage." But one boy named Ray, who usually stayed out of drama, noticed something else. One evening, he was walking home late and passed by a house. He heard music soft, powerful, rich with emotion. He stopped walking and stood still. The sound came from a nearby window. It was the same piece Mrs. Kelsey had assigned the difficult one. The playing was not just good, it was incredible. Ray stood there, stunned. He followed the sound and peeked through the gate. And that's when he saw Herlina sitting at the piano inside her house, playing like the world didn't exist. The next day in school, Ray didn't tell anyone what he saw. But he looked at Alina differently. During class, when someone made a joke about her, Ray didn't laugh, just watched her quietly. He had seen the truth. She was no ordinary student. She was something else. Back at home, Alina continued practicing. She recorded herself and watched the videos. She made small corrections, adjusted her hand positions, worked on her expressions. She didn't want the piece to be just correct. She wanted it to feel alive. The night before the performance, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her mind was full of memories, her father's smile. The first time she played on stage, the day he surprised her with her own piano, the day she found out he was gone. All of it mixed in her heart like a storm. But instead of tears, she felt strength. The next morning she got up early. She wore a simple dress, tied her hair neatly, and looked at herself in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, she didn't see a broken girl. She saw a pianist. At college, the music room had been turned into a small stage. Chairs were arranged neatly. Few parents had come to watch. Teachers stood at the back. Students sat in the audience, waiting. One by one, names were called. Performers went up, played their pieces, and came back. Some did well, some made mistakes. But the audience clapped politely every time. Alina's name was near the end. As the performances continued, whisper started again. Here it comes. She's next. This is going to be painful. Mrs. Kelsey stood by the piano holding the list. She looked up and called out Alina. Alina stood up slowly. She felt everyone's eyes on her. But this time, it didn't scare her. Walked calmly to the front, her steps light but steady. She sat down on the bench. The room grew quiet. The lights weren't too bright, but enough to see her clearly. Her fingers rested above the keys. She took a deep breath. In that moment before she touched the first note, time felt frozen. No laughter, no whispers, just silence. And then she began to play. Alina's fingers rested on the piano keys for a second longer before she played the first note. It was soft, almost like a whisper. The sound floated through the room, gentle and clear, and for a moment, it seemed like even the air stopped moving. Everyone in the audience leaned in slightly, curious and confused. They had expected her to fumble, to hit the wrong note, or to freeze in fear. But instead, she had started with a touch so smooth and calm that it surprised them. Her eyes were not on the crowd. They were focused on the keys, but not like someone trying to remember the notes. Her fingers knew where to go. Her hands moved with confidence, like they had done this 1,000 times before. And they had, just not in front of these people. As the piece continued, the notes grew faster, more complex. Her left hand moved across the lower keys while the right hand danced lightly through the higher ones. It was a difficult section, the kind that even experienced pianists found tricky. Alina didn't struggle. She moved through it like the music lived inside her, like the piano was just an extension of her own body. In the back of the room, Mrs. Kelsey stood completely still. Her mouth was slightly open. This was not what she expected, not even close. Some students in the front row stared wide-eyed. Few had their jaws dropped. The girl they had laughed at, mocked, and ignored was now doing something none of them could have imagined. She wasn't just good, she was brilliant. Even the other teachers, who had whispered about her in the staff room earlier, were frozen in place. One of them leaned toward Mrs. Kelsey and whispered, "Where did she learn to play like that?" Mrs. Kelsey didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. The music reached the middle part of the piece, a powerful section filled with emotion. Here, Alina's body leaned slightly into the piano. Her face showed the depth of feeling that came with the notes. This wasn't just a performance, it was a story, and she was telling it through music. Some students in the back stopped whispering. The ones who had joked about her were now staring, completely silent. Even the girl who had planned to laugh out loud during Alina's performance sat stiff eyes. Wide, unable to move, Alina didn't notice any of them. In her world, there were no students, no teachers, no laughter or judgment. There was only the piano, the music, and the memory of her father. The notes she played now were full of heart. They spoke of sorrow, healing, and strength. The kind of strength that grows slowly, quietly, and is only noticed when it finally shines. As she played, Alina remembered the nights she had cried alone, the days she had skipped meals because her heart felt too heavy, the mornings when she looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. And then she remembered how she started playing again, how each note brought her back to life. The music moved into the final part faster. It's more challenging, like a storm building up. Her fingers raced across the keys, but every movement was exact. There was no panic in her eyes, only focus. Some parents in the audience sat forward in their seats. One mother held her breath. A father near the back shook his head slightly in disbelief. Even Ray, the quiet boy who had once seen her play at home, looked both proud and stunned. As the last few notes came, Alina closed her eyes. Her hands slowed down. The music softened, like the storm was finally settling. Then came the final nota. Clear, gentle sound, that echoed in the room like a drop of water in silence. When it ended, she didn't stand up right away. She sat still, her hands resting on her lap, her head slightly bowed. The room remained quiet. No one moved. No one clapped. It wasn't because they didn't want to, it was because they had forgotten how. Then, a single clap broke the silence. It came from Ray, and suddenly, the whole room exploded in applause. It wasn't the polite kind of clapping people do after every performance. This was loud, real, and full of shock and respect. Some students even stood up. A few were shouting things like, "That was insane," or "unbelievable." Alina looked up, surprised. She stood slowly and gave a small bow. Her cheeks were red, but her eyes were shining. She didn't smile widely, but there was a peace on her face that said everything. Mrs. Kelsey clapped too. Though her hands moved slowly and her face showed confusion more than anything, she had expected failure. But what she had witnessed was something only a true artist could create. When Alina walked back to her seat, the students she passed looked at her differently. Some nodded in respect. Some simply moved aside to let her through. The girl who had made the popcorn joke couldn't even meet Alina's eyes. The next few performances felt dull. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew the best had already played. The energy in the room had changed. After all the performances were over, Mrs. Kelsey stood at the front and tried to give feedback to the class, but she kept glancing at Alina. Finally, she said there were some surprises today, one in particular. The class looked toward Alina again. Mrs. Kelsey continued, "I've been teaching for many years, and I have to admit, sometimes we make quick judgments about people, but music has a way of revealing the truth. Today, Alina reminded us that talent is not always loud, and strength can be quiet." It was the closest thing to an apology that Alina would ever get from her. After class, a few students came up to her. "That was amazing," one said. "I had no idea you could play like that," another added. Even Derek, the boy who had joked about her, walked up slowly and said, "Hey, sorry about earlier. You were really, really good." Alina nodded and gave a small smile. She didn't feel angry anymore. She didn't feel like proving anything. What she had done today was enough. Later that day, when she got home, her mother was waiting at the door. "How did it go?" With a hopeful smile, Alina didn't answer. She simply walked up to the piano, sat down, and began to play the piece again. Her mother leaned on the doorframe, listening with closed eyes. Slowly began to cry happy tears this time. Outside the house, the sky was golden with the evening sun. Said the music flowed again. It was no longer trapped. It was free, and so was Alina. The sound of clapping still echoed in Alina's ears even after she left the music room. It felt like a dream, but it was real. That day, something changed inside her. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a ghost walking through school. She felt alive, like she truly belonged somewhere. As she stepped outside, the sunlight felt warmer. The air felt lighter. The performance was over, but the feeling it left in her heart was just beginning. She didn't think much about what others would say. She was just happy she had really played, from the heart. But word spread faster than she could have imagined. By the next morning, the story of Alina's performance was already moving through the entire school like fire on dry leaves. Students who hadn't even been there came up to her and said things like, "I heard you played like a pro," or "Someone said you should be on TV." Even those who used to ignore her now looked at her with wide eyes and soft voices. She wasn't used to so much attention, felt strange but not uncomfortable. She didn't walk with pride or act like a star. She remained the same quiet girl, carrying her books, keeping her head slightly down, and listening more than she spoke. But now people respected her silence. In the cafeteria, students moved to give her space at the tables. Some even invited her to sit with them. She politely declined most of the time, still preferring her peace. But there was no more laughing behind her back, no more jokes. In fact, those who once made fun of her now seemed nervous when she walked. By one day during break, Ray walked up to her with a soft smile. "I saw you playing through your window a week ago," he admitted. "I knew you were good, but what you did on stage, it was something else." Lena looked at him with surprise. Then she smiled, a real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. "Thanks," she said softly. Ray nodded. "I hope you keep playing." That short moment meant more to her than all the compliments she'd received in the past 2 days. It wasn't just kind, it was sincere. Back in the music class, things had changed too. Mrs. Kelsey had always been the type to keep her distance from students. She didn't offer much praise and hardly showed emotion. But after the performance, she began looking at Alina differently. There was a kind of quiet respect in her eyes now. One afternoon after class, she asked Alina to stay back. When the room was empty, Mrs. Kelsey walked up to her and said, "Where did you learn to play like that?" Alina hesitated before answering. "At home," she said. "My father taught me. Then a friend of his trained me. I used to play a lot." Mrs. Kelsey nodded slowly. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I didn't want to," Alina replied. "Not after he passed away." There was a long pause. For once, Mrs. Kelsey didn't press further. She just placed a gentle hand on Alina's shoulder and said, "You have a gift. Don't waste it." Those words stayed with Alina. She thought about them while walking home. She thought about them while looking at the keys of her piano that night she had played again because she needed to. But now, a small part of her began to wonder, could this gift be more than just a way to heal? A few days later, she received a letter in class. It was an envelope from the school office. She opened it slowly. Inside was an official invitation to join the college's elite music club, Small, a private group of students chosen by teachers for special training, advanced lessons, and public concerts. She stared at the paper in shock. She hadn't applied for anything. She didn't even know such a club existed. At the bottom of the letter, in tiny handwriting, were the words, "Recommended by Mrs. Kelsey." Her hands trembled slightly. She folded the letter and placed it in her notebook. That evening, when she told her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered, hugging her tightly. The next week, Lena began attending the music club's meetings. The students there were some of the best in the school. Many of them had been learning music since they were small, just like her. But their approach was different. They were loud, confident, and full of competitive energy. At first she felt out of place. She was still the quiet one, still the girl who spoke little and watched more than she said. But the moment she sat at the piano, everything changed. She played with such control, feeling, and grace that even the most talented students in the club fell silent. One of them, a boy named Leo, came up to her after practice. "I've never seen anyone play that emotionally," he said. "Most people just focus on the technique, but you make it personal." Lena smiled and said, "It is personal." He nodded slowly. "I can tell." Over the weeks, Alina became more comfortable in the group. She didn't become loud or overly social, but her presence was felt. Her music spoke for her. Her hands told stories that words never could. Meanwhile, back in regular classes, her teachers started noticing her more. Not just Mrs. Kelsey, but even teachers from other subjects. Some would smile when she passed by. Others gave her nods of approval. Her quiet nature was no longer mistaken for laziness. It was seen as calmness, focus, and depth. One afternoon, during a school assembly, the principal called her name. She walked to the stage, nervous but steady. The principal announced that she had been selected to represent the college in a national youth music competition being held the next month. It was an honor usually given to students in their final year. But her performance had been so exceptional that the teachers made an exception. The applause that followed was loud, real, and full of admiration. After the assembly, students came to congratulate her. Even those who had never spoken to her before now wanted to shake her hand or take a photo with her. But Alina stayed grounded. She knew that this respect was not just because she played well, it was because she had stayed true to herself. She didn't try to impress anyone. She simply let her music speak. At home, she started practicing for the competition. The piece she chose was one her father had loved. It was long, full of emotion, and very challenging. Every note reminded her of him, his smile, his laughter, his way of saying, "Music doesn't need words, it needs truth." Some nights she would play until midnight. Her mother never complained. She would sit nearby, sometimes reading, sometimes just listening. One night, after finishing a long practice session, Alina sat quietly at the piano bench. Her fingers rested on the keys, but she didn't play. She looked around the room at the pictures on the wall, at the soft glow of the lamp, at the dust in the air catching the light. "I wish you could see me now, Papa," she whispered in her heart. She felt like he already did. The days passed quickly. The competition came closer. The school began preparing too. Mrs. Kelsey helped her choose the outfit, reviewed the score with her, and even offered to come along as her mentor. But what made Alina feel strongest was not the support from her teachers or the attention from classmates. It was the calm inside her. She wasn't afraid anymore, not of playing in front of people, not of being seen, not even of being judged. She had faced her fear already, and she had played through it. Now she was simply ready to take her music to wherever it could go. The day of the National Youth Music Competition arrived. The sun was just rising when Alina stood at the train station with her mother and Mrs. Kelsey. Her piano bag was packed, her music sheet carefully folded in a black folder, and her heart beating quietly inside her chest. She looked calm on the outside, but inside everything felt alive. It wasn't fear, it wasn't nervousness. It was something else, something strong, something steady. It was the feeling of someone who had finally accepted who they were. Mrs. Kelsey looked at her with a small nod. "You ready?" she asked. Alina nodded once, her eyes shining. They boarded the train and began the long journey to the city where the competition was being held. It was a beautiful place, full of old buildings and tall trees. The concert hall was even more beautiful. It had red velvet curtains, shiny wooden floors, and a grand piano that stood like a king in the center of the stage. Alina looked at it from a distance when they arrived. She didn't speak, just stared for a moment, then turned away and went to the waiting room. All the other performers were there too. Some were chatting, laughing nervously, checking their music sheets again and again. Some were practicing finger exercises in the air. Alina sat quietly in the corner, eyes closed, listening only to her breath. One of the organizers came in and gave each performer a number. Alina was number 12. That meant 11 performers would go before her. Each had their own style, their own talent, their own hopes. As she waited, she thought about the journey that brought her here, the silent days in her new school, the jokes, the judgment, the weight of losing her father, the locked piano room, and the moment she decided to play again. All those memories were part of her music now. They lived in her hands. Soon, the competition began. One by one, the performers walked up to the stage and played. Some were brilliant. Some were loud, fast, and full of skill. The audience clapped politely after each one, and the judges scribbled notes. Backstage, Alina listened carefully. She didn't feel like she was competing. She wasn't there to win over anyone. She was there to speak, through music, from the deepest part of her. Finally, it was her turn. Her name was called. She stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and walked toward the stage. As she stepped under the bright lights, the hall went silent. The audience watched a simple girl in a plain black dress, with her hair neatly tied back, sit at the piano. She didn't look like someone seeking attention. She didn't even glance at the crowd. She just sat down, adjusted the bench quietly, placed her fingers on the key sand, began to play. The first notes floated through the air like falling feathers. The piece she had chosen was personal. It was emotional. Didn't show off speed or power. It showed feeling. It needed heart. And Alina had plenty of that. Her fingers moved gently, each note filled with meaning. She played with a kind of tenderness that made the hall grow still. People leaned forward, not because the music was loud, but because it was deep. It was honest. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress. She simply told a story. As the music swelled in the middle section, the emotions became stronger. Her body moved with the rhythm, her eyes closed. She wasn't just performing anymore, she was remembering. Every key brought a picture to her mind: her father watching her as a child, her mother crying softly in the hallway, the lonely lunch breaks at school, the night she played again for the first time and years, all of it came through the music, and the audience felt it. One of the judges, a well-known composer, took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. Another sat back in her chair, hands resting in her lap, completely still. Alina reached the final part of the piece. The music softened, slowing down like a gentle goodbye. Her hands moved gently now, like someone folding a memory and placing it back in a safe place. Then came the last notes, soft, perfect, and full of peace. When it ended, silence in the room stayed for a moment. No one clapped right away. It was like the music had put a spell on them, and they didn't want to break it. Then slowly, the applause began. It started quietly, then it grew louder. People stood up clapping hard, some even whistling, the kind of clapping that meant more than good job. It meant thank you for showing us something real. Alina stood up, gave a small bow, and walked off the stage without a word. Backstage, the organizers smiled at her. One said, "That was magic." She just smiled back and sat down again. Mrs. Kelsey came rushing to her side. "That was unbelievable," she whispered. "I didn't know it could be that moving." Alina nodded. "Thank you for choosing that hard piece back then," she said quietly. Mrs. Kelsey gave a soft laugh. "I wanted to embarrass you, remember?" Alina looked at her with a playful glance. "It worked. But then it helped me too." Later that day, after all the performances ended, the judges announced the results. Alina didn't think much about winning. She had already received what she came for: peace, freedom, and the feeling of being herself again. But when they announced the winner, her name was called First Prize, Alina Mirza, for her breathtaking emotional performance and musical maturity beyond her age. She stood up, shocked, the room filled with cheers. Flashlights went off as cameras clicked. She walked to the stage again, accepted the award, and smiled softly. She didn't cry. She didn't jump in excitement. She just felt full of joy, full of memories, full of quiet pride. The next few weeks were like a dream. Her story was printed in the school newsletter. A local newspaper interviewed her. Music teachers from other colleges sent emails to Mrs. Kelsey asking about her, but Alina didn't change. She still wore simple clothes, still sat in the back of the classroom, still walked alone sometimes. But now, wherever she walked, people nodded at her with respect. They didn't whisper anymore. They admired. One morning, she arrived at school early and walked into the music room. It was empty. The grand piano stood silently near the wall. She sat down without thinking, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play, not for an audience, not for a grade, not for a trophy, just for herself. As she played, Mrs. Kelsey quietly walked in and stood near the door, listening. She didn't say anything. She just watched with a smile. Later that day, Mrs. Kelsey called her to the office and handed her a brown envelope. Alina opened it and looked inside. It was a scholarship form. Full tuition for a music academy in the city for students with exceptional talent. She had been nominated without her knowledge. She looked up in shock. "I believe in you," Mrs. Kelsey said, "and I'm not the only one." Alina's hands trembled slightly as she held the form. She didn't know what the future would bring, but in that moment, one thing was clear. She was no longer the girl who was forced to play a difficult piece. She was the girl who owned it, the girl who rose without shouting, the girl whose music spoke when her voice didn't, and wherever she went next, the world would hear it.